As a service provider administrator who has signed up for Akixi for Microsoft Teams, you will be logging into Akixi with a username and password provided during onboarding. When you log in, you will head to your own Central Management Environment, or CME. A CME is an area on a server where all your tenants are hosted. The CME can be used to configure the domain profile, which details the company name and email from address for scheduled emails, but more importantly, the license management. This restricts what can be assigned against any Teams environment, whether that's CXA Standard, Premium, or Advanced. Limits are simply added here, and then the Teams customer telephony server limits cannot exceed that of the CME. To begin provisioning a new Microsoft Teams customer, we'll start by going to the Telephony Server Administration page and clicking Add. Go to Communication and select the Microsoft Teams option. This will then display all the relevant items you'll need to configure the tenant. Integration mode is optional, where you can use real-time reporting or opt to use historical only. From here, you'll need to add the authorization email of who will be authorizing the tenant. The tenant ID also needs filling in, and this can be obtained from the Microsoft Entra platform. At the bottom of the page, a native app setup button will appear. Clicking it displays instructions on how to set up the app within the customer environment and the link to download the zip file. Head back to Details and complete the telephony server name. The billable option will always be ticked even if the customer wants an initial trial. This is because if a trial is selected, the billable part numbers will be overridden for 30 days automatically. If they do want to trial, you would tick the 30-day trial option. As to when that 30-day trial starts, we'll come back to that later in the process. Lastly, you can assign a license cap for your customers so they can self-serve. In some use cases, service providers do not manage the customer's Microsoft Entra tenant, so this allows service providers to cap the limit and give control to the customer if required. Now that the initial configuration is ready, we click Save. You can now sign out and wait for the customer to consent. This starts the automation in the background, which creates the partition for the customer and a customer sysadmin account, which they can use to authenticate and assign licenses with. Within a few moments, the automated process is complete and an email is sent to the customer. The email contains some key information about Akixi for Microsoft Teams, as well as a link to consent and your customer's username and password. They will click on the link, enter their credentials received via the email, read and accept the terms of service, and then they'll have to change their password. Upon changing their password, the customer admin will be redirected to the authentication page. They would click Grant Admin Consent and type their username and password. A full list of all the permissions is then shown, displaying everything Akixi needs to integrate. They'll click Accept to follow the full application consent, followed by Authorize, and then another window will be populated where they must click on their username again. The consent is now complete and the customer sysadmin is signed out. Now the consent is complete, you will be notified about the successful consent via email, and you should continue the process by logging on to complete the license management. During this time, the first synchronization is run, and all Teams users, auto attendants and queues will be added to the Akixi platform within that tenant. So you are signing back in as they've had the acknowledgement, and now to get your customer up and running. Go to Telephony Servers, you'll see that it's now running and it has synced 18 extensions to this particular tenant. And on drilling down into devices, you can see all the synced entities. 5 users with DDIs, the others have just got a username, and the queues and the auto attendants which also have DDIs. So now that's everything pulled from the Microsoft Teams tenant into Akixi, and we're ready to set monitoring users. So you would now go into Manage Enterprise Users, and you will be able to see everything that can be monitored from a user perspective. You can provision users individually or in bulk. As you can see, the email addresses are pre-populated for easy provisioning and can be edited if required. To assign a license, drop down the subscription type and select the correct level, then confirm by clicking the tick. This user is now created. Additionally, you can go to the top right and find Create Users for all unmonitored extensions. By clicking on a particular option, you can assign the base subscription allowed to the whole base. All users who currently don't have a license would then be assigned one. Be aware you are not required to assign a license to all users, and you can simply leave users in monitoring deactivated or remove the license if you don't wish for them to be monitored in Akixi. To find a summary of what's been assigned, you can click on the license management icon in the top right, which displays the licenses in use against the cap, if one is set. As you can see, there is one license assigned and the rest are in unlicensed. There are also spare licenses available. This will allow the customer to fluctuate on their team's environment in the use case where you might not administer their team's environment. So you give them an over allowance on licenses and they can leave them to assign as and when. So now the licensing is all set, all we need to do is put it into service. So we head back to the telephony server, which is where we need to add it into service. You will see the telephony server is running, but monitoring is only started once it's put into service. Before we do, you can see there is a trial countdown which says 30 days remaining. The countdown of 30 calendar days does not start until we put the telephony server in service. To complete the workflow and start the reporting feed, you need to go to the Communication tab, tick In Service, followed by Save. This will then start the reporting feed engine where real-time events will start. This completes the Akixi for Microsoft Teams provisioning process. The customer can now sign in and start to use the analytics portal through the UI or through their Microsoft Teams application.